Hello, hello. I have a secret for you. Come closer. Come closer. I read a lot of books this year. I know. Calm down. There's no need to get overexcited. I read a lot of books. I know people read more, but they can go fuck themselves. I think I read a lot of books. I read like over 100 books, which is insane. That does include short stories sometimes, and plays, and poetry collections. So inflating numbers, I'm punching as high as I can go. Nevertheless, before we get into it, please do like, please do subscribe if you enjoy. And I made sure when I made this list, I was like, it's going to be a top 10. I swore to myself. I looked myself in the mirror, pointed, and said, you sir are making a top 10 list. And I swore to myself, and as a result, at number 11...
we're back in England. Very, very rough. Oy vey. Very, very rough. We are going through in chronological order. I am doing it as I read throughout the year, rather than particularly, this is better than that one. I think they're all wonderful pieces of art, and as a result, the first thing we're going to do is have a look at February, which is where the first book comes from, and that isn't even a novel. It's a graphic novel. Mouse by Art Spiegelman is fucking genius. It is the autobiography of Art Spiegelman trying to get the story from his father about what life was like prior to going to Auschwitz, prior to the Holocaust, life in Europe at the time as the Nazi powers are expanding across it. It dots back in time. We have Art Spiegelman actually talking to his father and their active relationship post the father's experience in the camps. We have him reflecting on the life of his mother and the death of his mother. We have him reflecting on all different aspects. It is such a nuanced piece of art that is really so vivid and insightful. Inside, of course, the Jewish people are drawn as mice. I went to say meese for a second, mice, and Nazis are depicted as cats. There are other animals as well, anthropomorphized, that are depicting different nations and stuff, but they're the particular two that we think of. And yeah, I remember reaching the end and crying and thinking how utterly brilliant this was in terms of how self-reflective it was of his individual relationship with his father, and it really leveled and centered the piece, and just made it one of the best pieces of art I've ever read. The next book is the only book that I read twice, and I read it. The reason it's on the list is because whilst it's a reread, it is a reread that took place in the exact same year. I read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison twice. I read it in April, and then I read it in, I don't remember when, but I reread the book for a piece of work I was doing. It is one of the most brilliant books I've ever read in my entire fucking life. It's about a lower socioeconomic black family in Ohio. I think it's in the 1940s, if I remember. It's super short. It's maybe 150 pages, and it is packed with some of the tightest writing I've ever read. It's classic Toni Morrison, so timelines are dipping in and out. We're seeing characters when they're older, we're going back to their childhoods, we're immersing in all these people's lives, and the cause and the result of doing that is that we reflect and we really examine the cycles of abuse that are happening, and specifically in black communities at the time. Once again, this is brutal, it is harrowing, it's dealing with racism, it's dealing a lot with internalized racism, how these characters are being oppressed by not individual members of the white society during the course of the book sometimes, but it is this overarching sense of the entertainment, the toys that we are given. Everything is layered and made to appeal to a white audience. And if beauty standards, for example, are being shown to be like, this is what beautiful is, that is a white girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, that is the beauty standards, then as a result, if you're a child, you're not being told that you aren't beautiful because you're black, but you're told you're ugly because you don't have blonde hair, you don't have blue eyes, and you don't have white skin. And so as a result, Bacola is a character. The reason it's called the Bluest Eye is because she wishes, she longs for blue eyes, which is kind of a stand-in for the fact that she wishes she was in a kind of a white family. And so we deal with a whole cast of characters that are just in turmoil. Terrifying, disgusting things happen. It is not a book for the faint-hearted. It will make you feel terrible, but it is one of the best pieces of writing I've ever read. I absolutely adore the book.
We enter April now. April was where a buddy read started, an important buddy read in my life, because it became my favourite trilogy, and it just so happens to be in this very shot. It is the first book in the Life Ship Traders trilogy, Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. Following on from the Farseer trilogy, which I enjoyed, didn't love, I hit Life Ship with a lowered expectation, and instead I was hit with one of my favourite books I've ever read. We hit a third-person POV, which is always my preferred method. We have Robin Hobb's utter disregard for pacing, her phenomenal character work, prose that drips, just oozes class, wonderful thematic works around slavery and family, sacrifice, duty, gender work is involved. It is primarily, I would describe it as very much focused on the female characters in the family, which when you're it's a very nice juxtaposition of focusing just on Fitz and Farseer and then seeing what she can do with female characters, with women, is fantastic. If you have not read Live Ship, I would 100% recommend it. If you've read Assassin's Apprentice and have said, I did. But trust me, Royal Assassin's amazing, and then Live Ship is perfection. Absolute chef's kiss.
Then in May, we hit The Little Book That Could, Convenience Store Woman, Oy vey. This, Sayaka Murata, it is, who's it? Sorry, I'm looking for who translated it. I think it's, Ginny Tapley Takamori. Banger. This was, it is this really quaint little book about a woman who just doesn't fit in with regular society. She's 36, she's never been in a relationship, she doesn't really want to hang out with people, she's worked in the same convenience store for absolutely years, and she just likes to do her job. She likes to have a set routine, and she doesn't like how society views her. She gets questioned about why she's not in a relationship, etc. She gets all these things, and this book is just the exploration of how she deals with that. Once again, super short book. I read a lot of super short books last year. I gave this 4 stars when I read it. Just 4 stars in the sense of, you wouldn't expect it to be on the best of list if you've only given it 4 stars. But I have not stopped thinking about Convenience Store Woman since I read it. It's one of those things, I bought it for people as presents. I talk about it, I recommend it all the time to people in real life, because it's one of those books that I genuinely believe is a wonderful book to read in certain places in your life, because it's not one of those books that's going to be like, you have to become radical, or you have to fit in with society, you have to be all over the place, you have to choose one or the other. This book just says, be you. That would be nice if you were just happy being who you were. And I think certain people need to read that at certain times in their life. I certainly did. And Convenience Store Woman, it may not be, it has kind of plain prose, it's just telling you what's happening, it's very like the character. Now reflecting on that, at the time I thought, this could have been more, had a little something, but the thoughts it's left me with and the way I view the prose now is like, oh, that is the reason it's like that. It's amazing. I would recommend Convenience Store Woman. If you need a book on this list that's going to go, it's alright buddy, then that would be what I recommend.
June was a good old time, and one of the books that made it special was Panenka by Ronan Hession. This will probably not appeal to a lot of the people that watch the channel, However, give it a shot, trust me. This is by an Irish author set in a fictional town of Seneca. So Seneca is in the philosopher or whatever, the playwright, whatever you like. From the name, if you know who Seneca is, you've got the stoicism, you've got that. It's a wonderfully rich thematic through line throughout. And so what happens in this is that we are following a man who is nicknamed Panenka due to something that happened earlier in his life, a kind of tragic event that involved him playing a game of football, and that mistake has lived with him for the rest of his life, and we are now with him at 50 as a middle-aged man who is just trying to rebuild the relationships, find people that understand him and want to be with him. We follow this super small community, and it's just so heartwarming, so endearing. It destroys you. It brought tears to my eyes. I loved it thoroughly. The wonderful prose work inside of this. Every chapter ends with a punch, like not a forced punch. This isn't quite what I would describe as sometimes a Buckman-esque, when he constructs two sentences that are going to punch you, to just pummel you with emotion, even though it's not necessarily earned sometimes. Ronan Hession does it perfectly, where every single chapter builds to this culminative sentence that just goes, and there's your heart gone, and you die inside, or you feel good, or your heart glows, and then it's punched to pieces. There's a lot of punching involved, despite this being just a touching book. I need to get round to Leonard and Hungry Paul. I bought it immediately upon finishing the first, Panenka, but because there's only 2 books out at the moment, I don't want to run out of. I like having the option to come to it. So I think Leonard and Hungry Paul will be read this year. But Panenka, fantastic. If you're a fan of football, if you're not a fan of football, doesn't matter. If you call it soccer, all the better. Whatever you call it, get involved. Going from June into July, throughout the last 3 or 4 months before that, I had started the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee, and the culmination, talk about a culmination in Jade goddamn Legacy. There is a reason that Fonda Lee can create a poll on Twitter asking which chapter is her biggest crime in terms of destroying her audience, and can put 4 separate chapters from 2 different books, and when she just puts the chapter number, I know exactly what she's talking about, and it brings back like war-style flashbacks of trauma, and 2 of them are inside Jade Legacy. This series does something extremely special and just is so personality filled, has a lot of original elements that, when you have the voice that Fonda Lee does, creates this wonderful mosaic. Confusion around whether you're meant to like characters, not like them, understand them, hate them for the things they do, love them for the people they are. This is what I would describe as a very morally grey character-based series that continually expands and propels itself forward. Going from an inciting incident in the first book, a very small concept, sticking into one kind of central event, and then the series grows and grows and expands, and the worldview we have expands until it all culminates in Jade Legacy. There's nothing better as well when you get the growth of characters where you're with them so long that they are having children and you're seeing the legacy, evidently. And I always enjoy that, seeing a person through their entire lifetime, experiencing their faults as children, the mistakes they make as adults, and the wisdom they try to impart on their children, or the mistakes that they invoke and force on their children. Everything like that builds such wonderful depth and slaps so fucking hard. So excited for Untethered Sky. I loved Greenbone Saga so much that I made an episode of reading authors. It's the only one I've done of reading authors' favourite books, because I loved Greenbone so much. I'm in Canada. Well, I didn't even mention this, of course, that Fonda Lee is Canadian, and following on with that, we have another Canadian straight back to back. So what a better place to talk about them than when I'm in Canada is Stephen Erickson's Memories of Ice. This is a chunky book. that is unfeasibly chunky. This was chosen by Philip to be my reading his favourite books, and it did not let up. Every book from Gardens of the Moon to Dead House Gates to Memories of Ice grows and grows in terms of the understanding you take away of what to expect from a Malazan book, how to approach it, and most importantly, the enjoyment that I took from it. This is more of a return to Gardens of the Moon. All of the characters are so superb in this. I love every single one of them, what they bring, if they're dark, if they're funny, if they're light-hearted, if they're broken, if they're forged again, whatever they are, the scope of the story is unfathomable in the sense of it really does a great job of feeling like you are following humans that are at prey, you're following these different races, you are following gods, the interactions between all of them feel so lifelike and real. It condenses scope in such a way. I would describe it as, do you know like the food astronauts eat? Where they take, like, it's dehydrated, and it feels like that's what's happened here, is that you have this tiny mass market book, and then you put it in your mouth, and it has that little bit of water, and then suddenly it just expands and expands and expands until it is incomprehensibly large and thrilling and enthralling. And there's a reason that it's described on the very back as Homeric in scope and vision, because that's what it feels like. It feels like everything is expansive yet small, and nothing feels like it's out of your grasp, and eventually you'll understand. It's hard to really describe how a Malazan book reads without just reading it. I love the poetry inside of Malazan books. I think they are gorgeous. Not more much to say. Malazan slaps hard. I'm planning on continuing that as well. It's the problem with starting so many series that are long. You get mixed up on where to go. But House of Chains will probably be done this year. August apparently didn't have anything going for it, but September comes around and Terry Pratchett never fails to deliver. Nightwatch. Nightwatch is the sixth, I believe it's the sixth book in the City Watch series. It is also hard to describe the plot because, I mean, it's kind of crazy. Discworld is a series where you can do what you want. And Terry Pratchett does do what he wants. And if he wants to send a character back in time and have a story in the past where they meet themselves, so fucking be it. And so that is the general premise of this book. We see Commander Vimes, who we followed through the rest of this series, find himself in a happenstance that is expositely explained, where he is sent back in time to his own past and must kind of fill in history so nothing gets lost or out of place, etc. This is one of the single most brilliant pieces of just one character focused explorations that I've ever read. It is a culmination to Sam Vimes's and I believe the City Watch series that personally it severely had a detriment on the next book in the series that I read, because I think this is such a perfect culmination and gives you everything you need for the character that we have followed. Always funny, always charming, deeply emotional, and just utterly perfect. A perfect Terry Pratchett book. This and Going Postal are my personal favourites. I will definitely be rereading this book in the future. That's all I can say. If you know who Pratchett is, you know he's going to be funny. This is 6 books into a series, so you either read the whole series to get there, and if you've already read some, you know how good he is. So really, just fucking read it.
And in September, we hit a book that I've wanted to read for quite a while, and Grace was lovely enough to buy it for me, and that was The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Rofi. This was also wonderful. I loved the prose in this. It flips between different characters, and we get very raw dialect of Creole language. We get some white characters are depicted as just what we would consider bland British language. And then we also have, from the perspective of the mermaid, these wonderful poetical motifs throughout. And that all comes together to create a full image of the story that's being told. And that story is set during the 70s. It is about a man who is sat on the edge of a cliff in St. Constance, this little Caribbean village, and he's playing his guitar, and this mermaid out at sea. This is a world where people believe in mermen. Mermen are known to exist, but a mermaid, that's never been seen. And this that he plays his guitar, and the mermaid swims over, and it's like, oh shit, and they play to each other, and they kind of have this little inciting incident. And then we then see that the next thing that happens is that because of the vibrations of the guitar, when the mermaid next hears vibrations, it thinks that it's him again, goes, and it turns out it's this ship owned by white men who are doing a fishing competition. They capture the mermaid, and the rest of the book becomes about the guitarist on that cliff trying to rescue her, and then the aftermath of that. It's wonderful. I don't really want to say more than that. As I've said, that's how I describe the prose you've got. If you need to be ready for Creole language, you're going to have all different types of speech and vernacular that blend together and create a wonderful tapestry of what the story is being told. And it's a at heart kind of love story meets reflection on society and colonialization. It's very, 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 very good.
And so the final two happen to both be December reads. It was post-Christmas, pre-New Year. I slipped both of these two books in, and there could possibly be a hint of recency bias, but these were both fantastic, fantastic books. And the last one had to go on the list, which is why there are 11 rather than 10. And so the first one was a loving gift from Ellie, who goes to my uni. We did like a book, Secret Santa, and she got me My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. I read Black Vona earlier in the year. It's my first Moshfegh book, and it disturbed me to no end. I wasn't anticipating for how vile and filthy it was going to be, because it was an arc. No one had spoken about the book at that point. I had no expectation because I'd never read Moshfegh, and I was shocked. So, coming to this, I was aware of how she approaches writing, which is pure, utter filth. And I don't mean filth as in saucy, bit smut. No, I mean filthy as in shit, as in grime, as in despicable humans. And I loved every second of it. I reveled in it. This follows the main character, who is written in first person, who is on their year of rest and relaxation. They have reached a point in their life where they've received some inheritance and stuff. They don't have to worry about money, so they've decided that they have found a therapist who will give them sleeping pills, etc. And they are just living off of homemade cocktails of whatever drugs they can find to sleep for the longest possible time. And they are just trying to sleep through an entire year to hibernate and eventually re-emerge into the world as their plan. And along the way, we are dancing between the present, how she's living, the past, and how she got there. We're having character interactions with the world around her, how fucked up everyone is, how fucked up she is, the terrible things they're all doing to each other. And it is just vile, filthy, disgusting, brilliant. That is it. Like, if you find yourself and you're in it, the book will guide you. And I rinsed through it. I loved it. I've bought Eileen by Otessa Moshfegh now. I will reread Black Vona at some point, because now I understand that John Waters of literature is Otessa Moshfegh, and I love it. And then finally, this was a surprise. I only read this because I knew that I was getting on a flight. Sorry, I'm watching the football. I knew I was getting on a flight, and I knew I needed something short, something quick, something I could read during that whole day of travelling. I randomly bought this book at Waterstones just before leaving, which was When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamin Labatut. Don't know whether that's how you pronounce it, but it sounds about right. I put a little bit of a French twang on it. This was brilliant. I absolutely adored it. Once again, a December read right at the very end, picking other books to the post to take that 11th spot. And this is a series of short stories written from the perspectives of different scientists, mostly physicians, so mostly those involved with physics, sometimes chemistry, etc. It's kind of following them as they make their discoveries, and we kind of have this sense of, from the very beginning, the first short story describes the viewpoint of the character of a scientist who first makes pesticides and then has those pesticides used as the basis for gases used in the world wars. And so we immediately, it sets up this idea of making something from a place of discovery, or a place of not necessarily malice towards humankind, and then how it is tweaked and kind of corrupted, and how something that's made for pure intentions can be turned to evil, or how with pesticides that those are originally, they're still there to kill, they're still there to destroy, but how that can be used on a mass scale. And so we're exploring that. We're following characters who struggle with their own egotism, the idea that science isn't at all about fact all the time. Quite often it is how well you can explain yourself, how palatable your ideas are, how much you don't go against the grain of what already exists, whether your personality suits, whether you're good at selling stuff. And I thought it was brilliant for what it fit in such a small page count. It's a translated book. I've been trying to read more translated books, and we'll certainly be picking up more of Benjamin Labatut, if it exists, translated into it. Well, there we go. That's the end. An entire year of reading summarised into whatever many minutes I have filled. I really appreciate anyone who made it to this point. Please let me know what your favourite books of the year were. I'd be absolutely very interested, because I'm always looking for... this year I'm really building up a list of recommendations and stuff that if I just see and pick up, because I feel like I've now reached a point where I have a basis of what I like and I'm ready to explore. So if you did please do subscribe. Love you lots. Links are in the description for everything: Patreon, Discord, etc., etc. And have a nice rest of your day.